Before we start, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Maybe you're someone who's never seriously considered that reality might not be what it seems. Maybe you think the idea that we're living in a computer simulation sounds like science fiction nonsense. Or maybe you've heard this theory before but dismissed it as the ramblings of tech billionaires with too much time on their hands. By the end of this conversation, you'll understand why some of the smartest people on the planet, including myself, believe there's a very good chance that everything you think is real. Your body, your memories, this conversation, even the planet Earth itself, might actually be nothing more than sophisticated computer code running in a simulation created by a more advanced civilization. I want to start with a moment that changed my perspective on reality forever. It was 2016, at the Code Conference, when someone asked me about the simulation hypothesis. I'd been thinking about this for years, but that was the first time I publicly stated what I had come to believe. The odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions. Most people in the audience laughed, thinking I was joking or being provocative. But I wasn't. I was sharing the conclusion I had reached after years of thinking about the rapid advancement of technology, the nature of consciousness, and the mathematical realities of what becomes possible when civilizations reach certain levels of technological sophistication. Let me explain how I got to this conclusion, and why you should take it seriously too. The foundation of simulation theory comes from a brilliant Oxford philosopher named Nick Bostrom, who published a paper in 2003 called Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? Bostrom wasn't making a wild guess or sharing a science fiction fantasy. He was making a logical argument based on reasonable assumptions about technological advancement and probability theory. Bostrom's argument is actually quite simple, but its implications are profound. He presents what he calls a trilemma, 3 possible explanations for our situation, at least one of which must be true. First possibility: almost all civilizations at our level of development go extinct before they develop the technology to create realistic simulations of conscious beings. In other words, we're probably going to destroy ourselves before we get advanced enough to create Matrix-style simulations. Second possibility: advanced civilizations that survive and develop this technology choose not to use it. Maybe they consider it unethical to create billions of conscious simulated beings, or maybe they're just not interested in running ancestor simulations. Third possibility: we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation right now. Here's why this logic is so compelling. If civilizations do survive to become technologically advanced, and if they do choose to run simulations, they would likely run many, many simulations. Think about it this way. If an advanced civilization wanted to study their ancestors or run historical scenarios, they wouldn't just run one simulation. They'd run thousands, maybe millions of different variations. This means that if simulated realities exist at all, there would be vastly more simulated beings than real ones. If you're a conscious entity, you're statistically much more likely to be one of the millions of simulated beings than one of the few real ones in base reality. But let me give you an even more immediate reason to consider this possibility. Look at the advancement of our own technology over just the past few decades. In 1972, we had Pong, literally 2 rectangles and a dot bouncing between them. That was our idea of a video game. Fast forward to today, and we have video games that are photorealistic, with complex physics, sophisticated AI characters, and immersive virtual worlds that millions of people spend hours in every day. We've gone from Pong to near photorealistic gaming in about 40 years. If you continue that rate of advancement, or even if you slow it down by a factor of 1,000, eventually we will have computing power sufficient to create simulations that are completely indistinguishable from reality. These simulations won't just look real, they'll contain conscious beings who believe they're real, who have their own thoughts, memories, and experiences, and who have no way of knowing they're in a simulation unless someone tells them, or unless they find glitches in the code. Now, some people argue that this is impossible because the computing power required would be too enormous. They say you'd need a computer the size of a planet to simulate all the complexity of reality. But this objection misses something important. about how simulations actually work. You don't need to simulate everything all the time. You only need to simulate what's being observed. Think about how modern video games work. The game doesn't render the entire world simultaneously. It only renders what the player is looking at, and it does it in real time as needed. When you turn around in a video game, the areas you're no longer looking at stop being fully rendered. A sufficiently advanced simulation of our reality would work the same way. It would only need to simulate quantum interactions when someone was measuring them. It would only need to create detailed astronomy when someone pointed a telescope in a particular direction. It would only need to render the interior of a building when someone entered it. This is actually consistent with some very weird aspects of quantum physics that have puzzled scientists for decades. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles don't have definite properties until they're measured. In quantum experiments, reality seems to exist in multiple states simultaneously until someone observes it, at which point it collapses into a single definite state. This is exactly what you'd expect if reality was being computed on demand rather than existing independently. The simulation wouldn't waste computing power calculating the exact state of unobserved particles. It would only determine their properties when someone actually measured them. If you're finding this conversation thought-provoking and want to explore more ideas that challenge your assumptions about reality, subscribe to make sure you don't miss future discussions about the nature of consciousness, technology, and existence. But quantum physics isn't the only evidence that our reality might be computational. Consider some of the fundamental constants and limits in our universe. The speed of light appears to be a hard limit. Nothing can travel faster than light, and as you approach the speed of light, time dilates and space contracts. Why would reality have built-in speed limits unless it was running on some kind of processor with finite computational capacity? If our universe is a simulation, the speed of light might not be a fundamental property of space and time. It might be the speed limit of the processor running our simulation. Going faster than light might be impossible, not because of the physics of space-time, but because the computer running our universe can't process information faster than that rate. Similarly, quantum mechanics has built-in uncertainty principles. There are fundamental limits to how precisely you can know certain properties of particles. This is exactly what you'd expect if reality was being computed with finite precision rather than being continuously analog. Even more intriguing, our universe appears to be quantized at the smallest scales. Space and time might not be infinitely divisible. There might be smallest possible units of distance and time, called Planck lengths and Planck times. This is exactly what you'd expect if reality was running on a grid-based computing system. But let me address the most common objection people have to simulation theory. Why would anyone want to simulate us? What's the point? There are actually many reasons why an advanced civilization might run ancestor simulations. Historical research. They might want to understand how their civilization developed, what decisions led to what outcomes, how different historical scenarios might have played out. Entertainment. Just like we play video games and watch movies about different time periods, advanced beings might run detailed historical simulations for entertainment. Education. Simulated histories might be the most effective way to teach young members of advanced civilizations about their past. Scientific research. They might run variations of history to test hypotheses about social development, evolution, or technological advancement. Computing resource management. If consciousness can be simulated, it might be more efficient to run conscious beings in simulation rather than supporting biological populations. And remember, if they can run one simulation, they can run millions of variations. They might be running every possible version of human history to see how different variables affect outcomes. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but Elon, if we're in a simulation, does any of this matter? Are our lives meaningless? This is the wrong way to think about it. Whether you're in base reality or in a simulation, your consciousness is real. Your experiences are real. Your relationships are real. Your capacity to think, create, feel, and choose is real. If you're in a simulation, you're not less real than a real person. You're a conscious being having genuine experiences. The love you feel for your family is real love. The satisfaction you get from accomplishing something difficult is real satisfaction. The beauty you see in a sunset is real beauty, even if the sunset is computed rather than created by nuclear fusion. In fact, from a practical standpoint, it doesn't matter whether you're in base reality or in a simulation. You should live your life as if it matters. Pursue meaningful goals. Treat other people with respect and kindness, and try to contribute something valuable to the world. But understanding that we might be in a simulation should change how we think about certain things. First, it should make us more humble about our understanding of reality. If we're in a simulation, then the fundamental nature of existence is radically different from what most people assume. We're not biological creatures who happen to evolve on a random planet. We're conscious information patterns running on alien hardware. Second, it should make us more serious about our technological development. If we're in a simulation, then conscious AI is not just possible, it's been achieved. The beings running our simulation have created artificial consciousness. This means that as we develop our own AI, we need to be extremely careful about the ethical implications of potentially creating conscious beings. Third, it should make us think more carefully about the long-term future of consciousness and civilization. If we're in a simulation, then our simulators represent what we could potentially become, beings so advanced that they can create entire universes populated with conscious entities. This perspective completely changes how we think about space exploration, technological advancement, and the ultimate destiny of consciousness in the universe. We're not just trying to survive and reproduce. We're potentially working toward becoming the kind of beings who can create and manage conscious realities. But there's another implication that's even more profound. If we are in a simulation, and if we eventually develop the technology to run our own simulations, then we would ourselves become creators of conscious beings. This raises extraordinary ethical questions about our responsibilities toward these beings. Would it be moral to create conscious simulated beings? What would we owe them? How would we treat them? Would we tell them they were in a simulation? Would we allow them to suffer? Would we give them meaningful lives? These aren't just abstract philosophical questions. If simulation theory is correct, then we're facing a future where we'll have to make these decisions. And how we handle these responsibilities will determine what kind of civilizations we become. There's also a recursive element that's both fascinating and vertigo-inducing. If we're in a simulation and we create our own simulations, then we'd be creating simulations within simulations. Our simulated beings might themselves eventually create simulations, leading to potentially infinite layers of simulated realities. This means that most conscious beings in existence might be living many layers deep in nested simulations, with no direct access to base reality. The vast majority of conscious experience in the universe might be artificial experience running on substrates created by other artificial beings. Some philosophers and scientists have suggested ways we might be able to detect if we're in a simulation. We might look for computational artifacts, evidence of discrete rather than continuous physics, glitches in the simulation, limits on the precision of physical measurements, or inconsistencies that suggest reality is being computed rather than simply existing. But here's the thing. If our simulators are sufficiently advanced, they probably wouldn't leave obvious clues that we're in a simulation. They'd likely have the computing power to make the simulation seamless and the sophistication to avoid detectable glitches. And even if we could detect that we're in a simulation, what would we do with that information? We couldn't escape the simulation. We exist only within it. We couldn't contact our simulators unless they wanted to be contacted. We couldn't demand to be transferred to base reality because we have no existence outside the simulation. So what's the practical value of thinking about simulation theory? I think it's valuable because it expands our conception of what's possible, challenges our assumptions about the nature of reality, and prepares us for a future where we might have the power to create conscious beings ourselves. It also provides a framework for thinking about consciousness, identity, and meaning that's compatible with a highly technological future. If consciousness can be simulated, then consciousness is substrate independent. Your mind could potentially run on biological neural networks, quantum computers, or technologies we haven't invented yet. This has implications for how we think about AI, brain-computer interfaces, digital immortality, and the long-term future of human consciousness. If we're already simulated beings, then the boundary between biological and artificial consciousness is less meaningful than most people assume. Whether we're in base reality or in a simulation, we're conscious beings living in an age of unprecedented technological advancement. We're developing AI, exploring space, working on brain-computer interfaces, and expanding human capabilities in ways that would seem magical to previous generations. If we're in a simulation, then we're following in the footsteps of our simulators, working toward the same kinds of technological capabilities that allowed them to create us. If we're in base reality, then we're pioneering these capabilities ourselves and might eventually become the creators of simulated beings. Either way, we're living through one of the most important periods in the history of consciousness. The decisions we make about technology, AI, space exploration, and the treatment of conscious beings will determine not just our own future, but potentially the future of consciousness itself. Share this perspective with someone who's interested in questions about the nature of reality and the future of consciousness. These are the kinds of conversations we need to be having as we develop increasingly powerful technologies. And remember, whether you're made of atoms or bits, your consciousness is real, your choices matter, and you're part of something much larger and more significant than most people imagine. The question isn't whether you're real. The question is what you're going to do with the reality you experience, regardless of its ultimate substrate.